In the 1630s and 1640s, 5 unsung sisters were born in Rome. They were the daughters of an ancient noble house and nieces to the most powerful statesman in France. Through beauty, ambition, and scandal, they rose to become the wives and mistresses of Europe's most powerful men. So, join me as we explore the story of the infamous Mancini sisters. The Mancini sisters were among the most dazzling and scandalous siblings to ever glitter across the stage of early modern Europe. Their father, Baron Lorenzo Mancini, hailed from the illustrious House of Mancini, one of Rome's most ancient and formidable aristocratic dynasties. This was no ordinary lineage. The family claimed roots stretching back to the glory days of the Roman Republic, when an ancestor had stood at the heart of history, shaping the fates of empires during the Third Punic War against Carthage between 149 and 146 BC. Their mother, Girolama Mazarini, was a Roman native of far humbler stock, yet through a stroke of ambition and fortune, she married Lorenzo Mancini in 1634. The match owed everything to her powerful brother, Giulio Mazarini, better known to history as Cardinal Mazarin. Once a clever papal servant in Rome, Mazarin's spectacular rise carried him from the Vatican Secretariat to the crimson robes of a cardinal, placing him just a breath below the Pope himself. But his greatest stage lay not in Italy, but in France. Dispatched there in the late 1630s, Mazarin would become chief minister to the Sun King himself, Louis XIV, wielding near absolute power in the 1650s. It was his towering influence and his relentless scheming that would shape the lives of his nieces. Girolama and Lorenzo's union proved astonishingly fruitful. 10 children in all, 3 sons and 7 daughters. Of the boys, 2 would die in their teenage years, leaving only Philippe, who carved out a path in France as both a nobleman and a musketeer. Yet it was the sisters who would seize their destiny. Of the 7 Mancini daughters, 5 survived to adulthood, and what a force they became. Laura, Olympe or Olympia, Marie, Hortense, and the youngest, Marie Anne, were born between 1636 and 1649, a span of just 13 years. Together, these rebellious sisters would cause drama, shatter conventions, and scandalize all of Europe. Laura Mancini was the eldest of the Mancini sisters. She was born on the 6th of May 1636 and was the eldest of her parents' 10 children. She was born in Rome, where the family lived during the 1630s and 1640s. There she would have lived a relatively affluent childhood amongst the city's nobility. The Roman aristocracy at the time was a collection of families with long histories, many of whom had members rise to become cardinals of the church or even popes. Yet Rome and Italy were no longer as violent as they had been a century earlier during the Italian Wars. The most disturbing thing about Laura's childhood was instead the waves of plague which struck Italy during the 17th century. She received a good education, one which was meant to produce cultivated young women of the court amongst the Roman aristocracy. In 1651, at just 15 years old, Laura was married to Louis de Bourbon, who was 38. The union had been organized by her uncle, far away in Paris. Her groom was no ordinary noble though. He was Louis de Bourbon, Duke of Mercoeur, a grandson of King Henry IV, the very monarch who had founded the Bourbon dynasty as France's royal line. As such, Laura married a second cousin of King Louis XIV of France. They would have 3 children together, all boys: Louis Joseph, born in 1654, Philippe a year later, and Jules César in 1657. Not long after she married into the Bourbon line, the entire Mancini family relocated to the French court in Paris. This was in large part because their father Lorenzo had died. Girolama now looked to her brother Cardinal Mazarin for support. His command was simple: abandon Rome and take their chances in France, where Laura's new union had tied the family's fate to the Bourbon crown itself. In Paris, Laura was afforded the title of Serene Highness on account of being a princess of the blood. But the Mancini sisters' arrival in France was anything but smooth. Almost at once, they became the targets of vicious anti-Mazarin pamphlets, mocking them as dirt princesses and stinking snakes, sneering at their sudden rise. And it wasn't only the 5 Mancini daughters who descended on Paris. 2 cousins, Anne-Marie and Laura Maritozzi, were also under Cardinal Mazarin's protection. Together, the 7 young women formed a notorious troupe, and they were soon nicknamed the Mazarinettes. When they officially presented at court, Marshal Villeroy said to the king's uncle, Gaston, Duke of Orleans, "Here are young ladies who just at present are not rich at all, but who soon shall have beautiful castles, good incomes, precious stones, substantial silver plate, and perchance great rank." Sadly though, Laura Mancini wouldn't be around for much longer with her sisters. In February 1657, she died from complications after giving birth to her 3rd child. She was just 20 years old. Her widower became a cleric of the church following this, rising quickly to become a cardinal, as a result of which the care of Laura's 3 children was bestowed on her sisters. The next eldest of the 5 sisters was Olympe or Olympia. She was born in the summer of 1638. She was nearing her teenage years when the Mancini family relocated en masse to the French court. As the second eldest sister, she became a key piece in her uncle's relentless game of power. As a cardinal of the church, Jules Mazarin was unable to have a legitimate family himself. So, when the Mancini sisters' father died, Mazarin seized Girolama's children as his own surrogate family that would be used to build up a political dynasty in France. Therefore, Olympe was married in 1657 to Prince Eugène Maurice of the House of Savoy, a leading aristocratic line that ruled over the Dukedom of Savoy, straddling the border between France and Italy. They would have 8 children together, 6 of whom lived into their adult years. Olympe was a noted schemer. At the French court, she was said to have been the mistress of the king for a time, and she aligned herself closely with his sister-in-law, the Duchess of Orleans. And her intrigues only increased after the premature death of her husband in 1673. They peaked in 1679, when she was implicated in the Affaire de Poison, or the Affair of the Poisons. This centered on an alleged plot by Olympe and others at court to have a fortune-teller, Catherine Monvoisin, poison Louise de la Vallière, at that time a mistress to the king. This was just one small part of a massive scandal, and there were hundreds of people implicated in many alleged plots as part of the Affair of the Poisons. In the end, dozens of people were executed. Olympe's life was spared, though she was exiled from France. A stint at the Spanish court led to a fresh accusation of poisoning there, though whether there was any truth to this is unclear. Her final years were consequently lived in Brussels, where she managed to avoid the temptation to poison anyone before her own death at 70 years of age in 1708. The middle of the 5 Mancini sisters was Marie Mancini, born on the 28th of August 1639. She was a noted beauty, and King Louis was said to have been genuinely in love with her, though a suggestion that he might marry her was brushed aside by his councillors, who stated that he had to marry a European princess from one of the continent's leading royal houses. It stated that they had a very strong emotional connection, and King Louis wept so much over losing her, putting his kingdom before his heart. To keep Marie away from the king, she was swiftly married off, much to her own dismay, to Prince Lorenzo Colonna of Pagliano. They were wed in Italy in 1661, when she was 22 years of age. The House of Colonna was a major Italian family related to the Barberini, the most powerful family in Rome in the 17th century. Marie, though, was never happy in the marriage. She and Lorenzo had 3 children, Filippo, Marcantonio and Carlo, born between 1663 and 1665. Thereafter, she became reluctant to have any further children. In the early 1670s, as her marriage with Lorenzo deteriorated further, Marie was first sent to a religious house in a 17th century version of being committed, and then took the decision to leave Italy and spend much of her time with her sister Hortense in Northern Europe in the 1680s. There the pair became known as noted memoirists. She only returned to Italy when her husband died in 1689, where she found her children fully grown. Marie would continue to travel and write during a long life, lived down to 1715. She died back in Italy in 1715, at 75 years of age. Perhaps the most revered of all the five sisters was Hortense. There was a significant age gap between her and her three older sisters. She was born in June 1646, and so was little more than an infant when the Mancini family set off from Italy to join the French court in Paris. Intrigue surrounding her possible marriage was underway from a young age. In the 1650s, Queen Henrietta Maria, the wife of King Charles I of England, who had been executed by the English Parliament in 1649 at the end of the English Civil Wars, was living back in her homeland France, at the French royal court. Talk soon emerged of possibly marrying Hortense to Henrietta Maria's eldest son, the future King Charles II of England. That union would never materialise though, and when Cardinal Mazarin died in 1661, the possibility of the Mancinis marrying into royalty diminished, as the family's influence declined somewhat. Still, the same year her uncle passed away, Hortense, aged 14, was married to Armand Charles de la Porte, Duke of La Meillerie, and one of France's wealthiest men. Hortense's marriage, like Marie's, was a troubled one. De la Porte was 14 years older than her, and was a psychologically unstable figure who constantly believed that his attractive younger wife was being unfaithful, ordering his servants to conduct random searches of her apartments during the night to locate her alleged lovers. They had 4 children in quick succession after marrying in the mid-1660s, but she then fled from the union in 1668. By that time, her husband had taken to defacing his family's vast art collection, condemning the display of flesh as immoral, and was even rumoured to have ordered the removal of teeth from some of their female servants to prevent them from attracting male attention. De la Porte's mental decline was well known, and King Louis XIV offered Hortense a protected place at the French court after she left him. She was also granted a very large pension by her former suitor, the Duke of Savoy, which made her financially independent for many years. She then took up residence at the English court in the mid-1670s, where she renewed her acquaintance with King Charles II, who had been restored to the English throne back in 1660. A noted philanderer who sired upwards of 24 illegitimate children, Charles took Hortense as one of his mistresses, 2 decades after marriage to her had been suggested in Paris. However, it was not plain sailing. During a period of anti-French and anti-Catholic hysteria in England in the midst of the Popish plot, Hortense was loathed by many at court, being viewed as an agent of the French court despite her Italian heritage. She was also seen as extremely promiscuous, not only having an affair with a European royal, but also with King Charles's own daughter, Anne Leonard. When this came to light, she fell out of favour, and was no longer the king's favourite mistress. They did reconcile though, and she and Charles remained friends. Hortense lived out the remainder of her life in England, becoming a diarist like Marie. Their memoirs provide key insights into how aristocratic women of the early modern era, whose marriages had proved problematic, perceived their place in the world. She died in 1699 in her mid-50s. Bizarrely, her husband re-emerged at this juncture, taking possession of her remains and taking them around France on a tour with him in a cart, before eventually having her buried in the Mazarin family tomb. Finally, Marie Anne was the youngest of the 5 Mancini sisters. She was born in 1649 and was not even speaking when the family relocated to Paris. As the youngest, She was the spoiled darling of the group, and was referred to as the wittiest and most vivacious of the sisters. Her peculiar upbringing saw her play a maternal role for her nieces after her sister Laura died in 1657, despite the fact that Marie Anne was still a child herself. Famously, her marriage to Godfrey Maurice de la Tour, Duke of Bouillon, was agreed to in 1661, a day before her uncle, the Cardinal Mazarin, died. They were wed the following year in April 1662. They had a harmonious marriage, and it said that he loved her so much that he turned a blind eye to her love affairs. They had 7 children together, nearly all of whom lived long lives. The Mancini sisters were unusual or fortunate in having children that typically lived into their adult years, at a time when around 30% of children died in childbirth or infancy. Like her older sister Olympe, Marie Anne was also implicated in the affair of the poisons at the French court in the late 1670s. Placed on trial at the beginning of 1680, she successfully defended herself against the charges brought against her, though she was still asked to leave the court. Her valiant defense of herself in 1680 had gained her the acclaim of the French people, and before long she was invited back to the court, which by then had moved to Versailles, Louis XIV's vast new palace outside Paris. When things soured again in the mid-1680s, she left and chose to spend much of the rest of her life living a quiet life on her and her husband's country estates. The 5 Mancini sisters didn't only live scandalous and interesting lives at Europe's royal courts. They also had children who became prominent individuals. One of Laura's 3 sons died in infancy not long after herself, but the other 2 became dukes within the French nobility, while Louis Joseph also served as Marshal of France for a time in the late 17th century, a title awarded to the preeminent military figure in France of the day, he having served with distinction during the War of the League of Augsburg. One of Olympe's sons, Prince Eugène of Savoy, became one of the most renowned generals in Europe, beginning with his role in the Pan-European War against the Ottoman Empire in the Balkans in the 1680s and 1690s, and culminating in a successful partnership alongside the Duke of Marlborough at various battles during the War of the Spanish Succession. One of Marie's sons, Filippo, was a noted patron of the arts in Italy after he inherited his father's titles and wealth as Prince of Pagliano. Several of Marie Anne's sons also went on to play important roles in the French military in the late 17th and early 17th centuries, a time when France was constantly at war as the long-reigning King Louis XIV sought to dominate Western Europe. But the most striking story concerning the descendants of the Mancini sisters concerns Hortense's line. Her great-grandchildren were the famous 5 Nel sisters, who in a bizarre overlap with their Mancini ancestors became famous for their marriages and relationships with King Louis XV of France in the middle of the 18th century. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on the Mancini sisters. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of their lives down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also let me know down below in the comments. And I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.